back on the Zero Hour. I, of course, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. I always look forward to speaking to my next guest. I say that about a lot of guests, but I actually mean it in this case. Nathan J. Robinson is, I believe his title would be editor and publisher of Current Affairs magazine. He is the author of several books, as well as numerous opinion pieces. His latest book is Responding to the Right, Brief Replies to 25 Conservative Arguments. And he joins us now. So first of all, Nathan, welcome back to the program.
Hey, nice to see you again.
Good to see you. And there's a lot we could talk about. There are a million things we could talk about, but let's talk about your book. And
okay.
I'll start out with a confession. And the confession is this. When I initially heard this was your new book, I wasn't that excited because there have been other books about arguing with the right? And Ben from Jacobin did one, and Mehdi Hassan did one, which is more general about arguments. But I started to read it, and I really liked it. And I do really like it. I think it's great. And I was even starting to think, although I'm a pretty good arguer myself, I could have used it back in the days when I was willing to go on Hannity or whomever, when I had a little more notoriety. And it's really good. So, I mean, let's start.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean,
I had no idea your book would be good.
Right.
But it's good.
Against all my assumptions.
I thought this
preconceptions. No, I know you, so I thought it would be interesting, but I just thought, oh, this is, this ground that's been trod before. But to be honest, just philosophically, I mean, let's start with that. I'm not a big fan of arguers as pugilists.
Right.
And that to me, and I know you interviewed him, but that to me was what I took Mehdi Hassan's book to be. This is how to like pummel the hell out of somebody, which we've seen him do, and he's very good at it. Christopher Hitchens used to be very good at it.
Yeah.
I remember writing about Hitchens when he was alive that, his gift for that was kind of like, playing the musical saw. It's a rare and precious talent, but nobody actually wants to watch you exercise it, or at least I don't. I don't like the musical saw. I don't like, just crushing people for the sake of crushing them.
Yeah.
And but your book is a little different. Your book is very analytical, actually, in a good way. I mean, it's like basically. It's almost like a kind of a jujitsu manual of like, well, this is when they do that, they will tend to do that. Yeah. Here are 25 moves they make. Here are moves you can make to counter it, but not to like crush or humiliate them, to invalidate these kinds of rhetorical gamesmanship. Does that make sense to you?
No, absolutely. Well, it's interesting that you say that, you felt seeing it, that it was something that where the ground had been trod. The actual reason I wrote it was that I couldn't find a book like the book that I thought should exist. Right? There are all these right-wing books that are like training you on how to talk to a liberal. Right, how to all the comebacks you can have when you get in conversation with a liberal, and I have always felt like people on the left might overestimate how good we are at having conversations with people who disagree with us, and that we might assume that because they're wrong, we're going to win any argument that we get into, or we're going to come out feeling triumphant. And oftentimes when we actually have these conversations, I know I used to and have, you feel very, very frustrated, and you end up thinking, well, the other person is just totally obstinate and impervious to reason. But I actually give us some of the blame there, which is that I think that oftentimes we're not really thinking, well, okay, what would be persuasive to this person? what exactly are they saying, and how can I respond to it in a way that stands the most chance of getting them to shift a little bit. And I think that's very different from what Mehdi Hasan. I interviewed Mehdi Hasan about his book "Win Every Argument," and I actually think the two books go together quite well, but they're doing something very different. He really is about the pummeling. His book contains a section that is like a defense of ad hominem arguments. There's like a whole defense of why calling people, denouncing people personally is actually legitimate. I don't do that at all. My whole book is like, I want you to understand where sincere people who make right-wing arguments are coming from, so that if you find yourself in conversation with them, you are going to be able to anticipate what they're going to say to you, and you are going to stand the most chance of saying something that doesn't sound foolish and that they don't have an instant comeback to.
Right. And I think that approach, first of all, it comes from, you're not targeting professional debaters, right? So much as you are sincere believers in what you or I would consider to be a misguided worldview. And by and large, that's right wingers. Could be centrist, quote unquote, liberals too, but by and large, we're talking in this case about right wingers. And that, first of all, to take that position, Nathan, you have to accept that there are people who sincerely hold these beliefs. Yeah. And not everybody on the left, as broadly defined, accepts that that's even true. In other words, there's a tendency to believe that everybody who's on the right is, excuse me, a racist, a hack, evil, and therefore there is actually no point engaging with them. And what's your thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that after the current affairs have been around since the end of 2015, early 2016, over the course of the now 8 years of doing this, I've just found it to be wrong, just empirically wrong, because I write things, I get emails from people who say, I used to believe X, then I read your article on it, and now I believe Y. I have shifted my position. You opened my mind. And you opened my mind about Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro. Now I get people who say, I've read your analysis. I thought it was persuasive. And so I think the mistake that is often made is assuming that we're talking about that there's one kind of person in the world, which is the unpersuadable person, the person who is intransigent and you can't reach. I go, well, that is a person. That is the kind of person. And in the book, I say, when you realize that you're speaking with the sort of person who you have no chance of shifting in any way, you can leave the conversation because it is futile, and you should not try and train yourself to how am I going to own and destroy this person unless it would satisfy you to come away with a feeling of self-satisfaction. Well, I really proved them wrong, even though they didn't end up agreeing with me. What you're looking for is people who are slightly open-minded, who are willing to hear you out. And when you find such people and you find yourself in conversation with such people, you want to think, well, what is the best way that I can give a response to them that is going to bring them around? And the thing is that, like, labor organizers think about this all the time. This is like the organizing mindset. They think, Jane McAlevey has this great thing about how she doesn't want to talk to, when you're organizing workers, you don't want to talk to workers who agree with you, who are going to vote for the union. You want to find the people who hate the union. And then you have to think about, like, how do I respond to the things they believe? How do I shift them? And if you want a successful political movement, if you're not already in the majority, you have to think about, well, how do I take people who don't already agree with me, and how do I get them to agree with me?
Well, absolutely. And one of my long-term complaints about a lot of people who are involved in liberal politics or democratic politics or certain kinds of activism from a not, I don't know how to describe, a certain liberal perspective, don't want to do that and will speak with contempt about people who disagree with them. My response is always, well, then actually politics or activism is not the field for you, because the job is actually to talk to people who disagree with you. If you're a politician, if you're an activist, exactly what you said about Jane McAlevey and labor. That's the job. It's not to, I have occasionally deliberately written pieces to like boost the morale of people who already agree with me so that they, but other than that, the job is make a case.
Right.
And this, I learned a lot working for Bernie Sanders and seeing him, small rooms and big rooms. He was one who never hesitated to make his case to anyone, including people who disagreed with, especially people who disagreed with him. And he got so much heat for going on Fox News. Like, no, that's where you go.
Yeah.
Those are the people you want if you're Bernie Sanders. And he reached, not all of them, but a lot of them. So that, to me, I take your book in that spirit. In fact, I would even go so far as to say there was a certain amount of compassion towards, again, not the professional arguers, but, people who hold these views, and that's reasonable.
I pay them the respect of thinking that they deserve to have a response, right? Which is that to assume that they might be willing to have a discussion. And it's interesting because I feel like I am actually more vicious towards the right-wing position than, my Trump book is Anatomy of a Monstrosity. I have almost nothing good to say about, I don't do any of this, they make a few good points and maybe we could find some common ground. I just think the right-wing worldview is so toxic and horrible and needs to, be kept out of power. And so I don't make many concessions. But I do think that when you encounter someone in your life who says, well, I don't have any white privilege, right? You should, or, well, if you raise the minimum wage, it's going to toss people out of work. Or, well, socialized medicine, that's going to turn the government into my healthcare into the post office. And, you're going to be lines and when people say these things to you, I think you ought to have something to say to them, because right. I think that the conservative story, and I talk a lot about what the sort of components of the conservative story are, which are often this like fear that some kind of proposed egalitarian measure is going to destroy civilization. It's going to create, it's not going to solve the problem and it's going to make everything worse. That's very, very common that in right-wing rhetoric, whether you're talking about the response to the Green New Deal, where you're talking about public health care, it's always kind of the same story, but it's a very, very compelling story for a lot of people. And if you want people to not believe it, you need to think about, well, how can I take someone who has bought that story and talk them out of it?
Yeah. And to me, part of that is part of being able to do that successfully is having grounding in a different story than theirs. To me, one of the failures of modern left politics, broadly defined, is there's no coherent narrative. I mean, whatever you say about the right, there's a coherent narrative that people respond to. If people's lives are being eroded by the erosion of the middle class and rising healthcare costs, we could go down the whole list. And, you think about, take three issues, abortion, and I'm talking specifically in this case about white communities, rural communities, or whatever, abortion, immigration, and gun rights, let's say. Three hot button issues that trigger a lot of us when taken, no pun intended, when taken independently. And, but if there's a coherence to their fear, right? There's a coherence, which is they're fearing that their way of life is done. So it may manifest itself in racist ways, but fear of like others coming in, fear of like, we'll stop existing because we're not allowed to reproduce or whatever, fear that our guns will be taken away and will be sent to prisons. These are all irrational and wrong, but they flourish in an environment where no counter narrative is presented. This is why I think, I don't mean to harp on Bernie, he has his flaws too, but this is why I think he was successful for a while, because, it's the millionaires, it's the billionaires, it's the, okay, they get that. That's a narrative. And then you can break down, why isn't immigration a problem or whatever it might be. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Bernie is great at talking to people in Trump country. When you see, and I think I cite examples of him, sitting down and and asking people and listening to them, and not just trying to argue to them immediately, but saying to them, well, tell me about your life situation. Tell me about, tell me about your interactions with your health insurance company. Let's find some things out here that we can work with. Okay. You've had horrible experiences with the American healthcare system, have you? Oh, you're paying $800 a month for your insurance, and you have a massive deductible, and you have medical bills that you can't pay. Oh, you're struggling with your rent. He will ask these questions. He will draw out facts. He will listen to people, and then he will say, "Well, this is why I think that we should have a Medicare for all system in which you don't have to pay anything when you go to the doctor." And like they do in other countries, and let me tell you about other healthcare systems around the world, and then you find the things that speak to people, and you listen to them, and then you present alternative solutions, and he does it so well. I had a thing recently where I said I reviewed his book, and I said that Ronald Reagan is called the great communicator. But I really, honestly, I think Bernie Sanders deserves that title in American politics because it's very underappreciated how good he is at getting a message across to people. It's not easy to get a message across. And the fact that Bernie Sanders could get millions of people to understand the basics of like what his worldview is, what his policies are, and to be inspired by it, shows that he's just a brilliant communicator. And I would distinguish him from Barack Obama, who is a brilliant speech maker.
Right. Orator.
But not a very good communicator, in that, like, the message, the substance that, Barack Obama's far better speech maker than Bernie Sanders. But in terms of getting a message across to people and having them understand it, you would come away from Obama's speech and going, that was so inspiring. I have no idea what he said.
Right. No, and that's not accidental to me. It's kind of a political muzak, and I'll just tell you, this is about you, but quick Bernie story. When I first went to work for him, I said, why don't we write an op-ed for you about prescription drug costs? Great. Important issue. So I wrote this piece and editorial for him, go out under his name. And I think, I forget what I called it, the burden on the middle class of prescription copays. I can't remember. He looked at it, he looked through it, and he only made a couple mistakes. He crossed out the headline and he changed it to high drug prices are killing Americans. Mm. And I thought, you know what? Master class in political communication already. Yeah. And then he just changed the first sentence so that it read, everywhere I go, doctors tell me that their patients are dying because they can't afford the medicines the doctor has prescribed. Simplicity is a huge part of this, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And so that's why, and the other thing is, in writing this book, it was an exercise for me because I was thinking to myself, well, how would I respond in a way that seemed persuasive? And when I started to write out these chapters, take issues like, if someone says abortion is murder, or someone says the Nazis were socialists, and I start to think, well, okay, how would I respond? My first response is a bunch of waffle. because I haven't organized my thoughts, I haven't simplified my thoughts, I haven't tried to come up with what I think the best points are versus the least persuasive points. And so what I've tried to do here is get that simplicity and clarity, get to the point, find the things that I think are most relevant to talk about, not get bogged down in other irrelevant things. And I don't necessarily think that's easy. Bernie makes it look easy, but it's not easy. Oftentimes, if you're asked for your opinion on a topic, the first thing that comes out of your mouth is going to be a mess. It's just not going to sound good.
Yeah. So is part of your that's absolutely right. So is part of your prescription kind of pre-planning, thinking this all out in advance, like kind of posing the, because to me, what I'm getting so far from your book is more of the sort of cognitive, kind of more of the mindset that's presented. Well, this is rationality. This is reason. This is what reason looks like to us. But the specific arguments of, maybe you go into this later, I don't know, but of, well, what do you say when they call, say, the Nazi Party had socialist in its name? Mm-hmm. And it's, my answer is, well, the Democratic Party has Democratic in its name too, but have you followed the primaries lately, I like that. My one, I think, victory against a conservative on Fox News that I was debating was when he's Social Security. He said, well, they're just IOUs anyway. And I said, don't you pay your IOUs? And he went, I never thought about it. I have to think about that. It's good. But so as part of it, just breaking out of the, how do you put it, this sort of loaded dice, the rhetorical loaded dice of how they express, well, this is only rational or whatever.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. I mean, you've given two examples there that are very good, because the Democratic Party has Democratic is nice because, when someone says that the Nazis were socialists, they're relying very heavily on the labeling National Socialist. They say, well, look, this is how can you deny what is so self-evident? Someone who calls themselves a socialist is a socialist, National Socialist. Case closed. Open it shut. How could you defy logic here? And then Dinesh D'Souza has a whole book about big Hitler was a prototype for big government today. And then so the first thing you want to do in responding to that case, and you will get into discussions with people in your life who say things like this. I mean, if you have a diverse group of contacts that aren't just all people who already share your exact politics, you will run into people who say frustrating things when they get on the topic of politics. So what do you want to do when someone says that? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to prove that labels don't accurately denote the thing they're labeling a lot of times, and that people call themselves things they're not. Because if you can establish the principle that if you can get the person to agree that oftentimes people in politics call themselves things they're not, well, then we've gone a long way towards, okay, well, we haven't settled the issue by just pointing to the word socialist and National Socialist, have we? Okay, because we established that principle. So now we have to say, now we get to the point that we really want to argue, which is having established that your case there doesn't work. Is there anything in common between the Nazi Party agenda and the Bernie Sanders agenda? And the answer is no, because their agenda was the extermination of all Jewish people in Europe, whereas Bernie Sanders' agenda is free healthcare and kindergarten for all.
Right, and Jewish. Also... another riposte might be, yours is a substantive response. Mine is, so you believe everything Hitler says? Is that, is that your credo? Hitler told the truth?
Right. Well,
I'm being more flippant though.
But, I see a lot of people who say on the left who think that if you don't bother, we talked about, you don't bother replying. When someone says, oh, the Nazis were socialists, you're like, well, obviously that's not true. That's stupid. That's historically illiterate. You'll just say, oh, that's historically illiterate. That's ridiculous. Whereas my approach in this is, I'm sorry, but if this is what people believe, you have to think, okay, I'm not, are they going to be persuaded if I go, you're historically illiterate? Right?
Right.
Is that a compelling way to change someone's mind, to say, no, you're wrong, you're historically illiterate, this is ridiculous, I shouldn't respond to this, you don't know anything? And I think that is the default response. I see it a lot of the time. Whereas, as you and I think, well, what is something, not just a snappy comeback that is satisfying, but something that it throws them off a little bit and causes them to have to think, right? And so your example of the IOUs thing, don't you pay your IOUs, right, is good because it's not just that it sounds good. It's a good retort, right? It's a witty retort. It's good because he had to think. And he had to go, well, hey, okay, what distinction can I draw now between this kind of IOU and the other kind of IOU? Because he has to do in response to that one of two things. He has to either say, no, I don't pay my IOU as an IOU is worthless, or he has to concede that you're correct, that a lot of IOUs are quite valid promises that get paid. And then, the lucidity and clarity of his original, seemingly clever statement is all drained, and now he has to start drawing distinctions where, oh, well, this is a worthless one. Okay, well, how do we know that, right? And so it's good, not because, as I say, you should really avoid, and I encourage people in this book to avoid just doing things that make you feel like you've owned and destroyed the other person, but to do those things, to give those things that throw them off and force them to think about their own beliefs and to try and deepen their argument. Because oftentimes what you'll find is when you do that, when you throw those things at them, they don't know why they think what they think.
Right. And I was actually I give a lot of credit to that conservative host for saying, I have to think about that. I mean, that's a great response. That's a human response. But I guess part of this to me, Nathan, and part of what I think your book embodies is implicitly, and maybe I'm projecting, but is, don't stress either. I mean, it's kind of, a good example of that for me is the Nazi argument, right? The Nazi socialist argument, because when I first heard that, it was like, I kind of got like, it's so annoying because it's complicated. I have to explain that in 1930s Germany, socialism was a popular brand and they were trying to, confuse workers but then I realized much better if I just don't stress about it. First of all, to start from the point of view of there is a good explanation for this. It's not what you think it is. It doesn't prove that socialists are Nazis. So stay calm, Richard. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do, because as I mentioned earlier, this feeling of frustration that you get, there's the classic cartoon, someone is wrong on the internet. I have to keep typing because someone is wrong on the internet. And I used to get it, all these arguments on the internet, and I freed myself from this. And I'm trying to give people, in some ways in this book, a sense of calm, because you're like, okay, well, once you've thought through the issues, you have a good response, you have a clear response, you can go into these conversations with people, feeling confident. And also, I don't know, I feel like when you understand your own beliefs better, I'm almost trying to help people understand why they believe what they believe by helping them to clarify in their minds, like, oh, this is why the minimum wage argument doesn't work. This is why we need the Green New Deal. This is why these conservative arguments aren't a threat to you, because they can feel like a real threat if you don't understand them and you haven't thought about the response to them. You can feel like, oh my God, if I don't know how to deal with this and my position is demolished, I don't know. I can't lose this other person. I can't lose this. I have to keep fighting this. But yeah, I want to give people this sense of, I don't know, I would describe it as a sense of calm.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important. And, I found, conversations lately, last few years, with real right wingers, I come across in various situations, where this, a couple times, you have very socialist ideas, Richard, but I don't get the fact, like, yeah, I do. But here's why, because I don't think we can save climate change without a very different approach. I don't think we can mitigate it without a very kind of public approach, sector approach. I don't think we can address economic inequality as bad as it's gotten, or corporate power, without, those ideas that are, historically socialist. Because, I used to be like a little defensive, and and people I find are either defensive or often either defensive or aggressive about it. Yeah, F you,
Yeah.
It's like, no, yes, I am. Right. And let's talk about why. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there's this. The other thing is, I get frustrated with all these calls for civil discussion, because we should reach across the aisle, or we should get people. We should just end the polarization by getting people to sit down and really talk. And I think that is correctly criticized. I am combative in a certain way, because I think these things matter, and I don't like to make concessions on issues where I think that there is a very clear moral right and wrong, and that we shouldn't cede ground. But at the same time, I do believe that you have to discuss and persuade. I don't think there is a way around that. And so this book is a handbook for, okay, well, how can we actually talk to people in ways that are not aggressive and hostile and likely to lead to just futility? It doesn't go anywhere, so you might as well have not had the conversation. But that don't go, well, you believe this, I believe this, and who's to say what's right?
Right. No, that's a milquetoast version. And you can hold moral opinions while still engaging with people who don't come from the same point of view, without saying, each opinion has equal weight. You can say, I believe I'm right, but here's why. And there is a fundamental difference between that and sort of saying, well, each deserves to be honored and respected. I don't think racism deserves to be honored and respected. I don't believe that 1 in 6 children living in poverty deserves to be honored and respected. I don't honor and respect those opinions, but people who are persuadable, I feel it's my duty to address those with them, in a gentle way, not a gentle way, but a calm way. So,
yeah. Now, Mehdi Hasan, when he came on a current affairs program, we had kind of an argument over what you should debate. Because the interesting thing is that even though he's the real debater between the two of us, he has all this like, well, I won't talk to Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's like, I will not talk to her. I won't debate her. I won't legitimize her. And I had a very different take, which is, I'll talk to anyone. And he said, well, would you talk to a Holocaust? Would you debate a Holocaust denier? And I said, I wouldn't not debate a Holocaust denier on the principle that I will never debate such a subject. I said, the reason I wouldn't debate a Holocaust denier is because Holocaust denial is not getting popular at the moment. But if it was the case that there were huge numbers there's a massive political movement that threatens to take power, that is committed to Holocaust denial, then by God, I'm going to lay out the evidence, and I'm going to do so aggressively. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, I would have a conversation with her, but I wouldn't have the kind of frustrating conversation where, you let her slip out of things. I would always debate people. I think if I started to adopt his position that, some things are just so bad you can't debate them, I say, well, I don't know, because I think like letting people die of preventable illnesses is morally heinous, but I'm still going to debate healthcare policy, even though I think the
Exactly.
people on the other side are like tantamount to committing a homicide.
Oh, 100%. No, that's exactly how I feel. And, well, first of all, I have to say that Mehdi's response seemed presumptuous to suggest that, he's so much more of a major figure in American politics than Marjorie Taylor Greene, that, it's upon him to legitimize or not legitimize her. But I mean, I don't think she's a legitimate figure, but she's a very powerful, well-known one.
Yeah.
Has enormous impact. I would debate her. The idea that something, I think your answer was perfectly correct. I think if ideas are gaining traction, they need to be debated, whether, and I think a lot of positions, this is why I get frustrated with people talking about the legitimate Republican Party, the legitimate centrists, the legitimate bipartisan consensus versus, the immoral people we won't talk to, because a lot of those views do result in considerable death and or suffering. But I'll debate them all day, and I won't necessarily assume that Marjorie Taylor Greene is an exception. When it comes to things like healthcare, for example, or military policy, I won't assume that the person on the other side is just venal and an incarnation of evil unless they demonstrate themselves to be. I think there are misguided people, and I think speaking with them might be an opportunity to convince some third parties, at least, that this is not the way to go.
Well, and being someone who reads a lot of conservative books and watches their YouTube shows and such, I am aware that a tactic that is used to help convince their audience that they're correct is to say, well, leftists are afraid to discuss this, and they ignore us because we've got the truth, and they don't want you to know the truth. And they won't discuss it, they won't debate it, they won't let us on their program because they know that if the truth were seen, they would have no response to it. And they say this all the time. In fact, this is the technique that I'm just writing an article about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he uses this in his letter to liberals. He says, there's all this information about why vaccines don't work, and they won't debate it, they won't discuss this evidence. And one of the things me and my colleague, who's a physician, do in this article is we go, well, we'll discuss your evidence. Let's hear it. And we go, look, it doesn't work. It's just fallacious. You just misunderstood. You just misunderstood a chart, And then that argument that, they won't engage with this, they're ignoring, it doesn't work anymore. And people will see that it doesn't work. He can't go like, they're hiding. They don't want to see my real facts. And I think that is quite powerful when they say that. I think that people see them, that, they see their chart and they go, well, why won't they debate the chart? Why won't they refute the chart? Maybe it is because he's discovered things that are being hidden from us. So I think it's really important to neutralize that. And that's why my book is responding to the right, because they say, look, because the conservatives go, look, they have no response. The left has no response. And I go, yeah, excuse me. They have a response. Here is the response. I think it is a persuasive response.
Well, I need to let you go, but, I will say that I practice sometimes on Nextdoor, the app where neighbors speak with one another, because in my neighborhood of Silver Spring, Maryland, a lot of right-wingers and so on, and one of their favorite memes whenever somebody talks about a crime being committed is, because the Montgomery County government has defunded the police. That's like a common one, and I'll start by saying, if you have a link that's to a news story, explain, because my understanding is that they have not, that they've been trying to hire more police, but recruitment nationally is difficult. But if you have a link, I'd love to see it. So, and they, of course, they never have a link, but anyway, any closing thought? There's so much else I wanted to talk to you about, but we
wanted to talk about music too.
We wanted to talk about music and perhaps clothing as well, but
and menswear.
That will have to wait.
The substantive issues.
The substantive.
We didn't get to the issues.
I mean, we don't have to wear denim shirts anymore and play banjos like Pete Seeger. I mean, times have changed, brother. But the book, I guess we'll end here. The book is responding, excuse me for my voice. The book is responding to the right, brief replies to 25 conservative arguments by Nathan J. Robinson, who is my guest and my friend. A great job, Nathan. And as always, great to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you. And you will see us or hear us very soon. We'll be right back. Richard RJ Eskow. This is the Zero Hour.